A young black teen in a hoodie quietly hands over a platinum card at an upscale restaurant. The white waiter laughs in his face, mocks him, and calls over security to kick him out. What the waiter doesn't know: the teen owns the building, and his mother is the billionaire CEO who bought the restaurant chain last week. Before the meal ends, the waiter will be jobless, humiliated, and begging for a second chance in front of the entire staff. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, hit that like button and buckle in, because this one's gonna leave you speechless. The heavy glass door of Hamilton's Grill whispered shut behind Jalen Carter, sealing out the noise of Fifth Avenue and cocooning him in a world of hushed conversations, clinking silverware, and the low, warm glow of candlelight. The air smelled of roasted garlic and old money. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses sat at tables draped in white linen, their laughter soft and controlled. Jalen, 17 years old, stood just inside the entrance, a quiet island in a sea of formal luxury. He wore a simple grey hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. He felt the eyes on him immediately. They weren't curious looks. They were dismissive glances, quick assessments that catalogued his clothes and wrote him off in a single, silent beat. He was used to it. He kept his shoulders relaxed and his expression calm, moving with a gentle purpose toward the host stand. A man with slicked-back blonde hair and a starched white shirt stood behind the polished wood, a smear already forming on his lips. This was Trevor Dalton. He watched Jalen approach, not as a potential customer, but as an unwelcome intrusion. Trevor's world was built on appearances, on the clear lines between those who belonged and those who did not. In his mind, the kid in the hoodie was so far on the wrong side of that line, he might as well have been on another planet. He didn't even bother to offer a greeting. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You sure you're in the right place, kid?" Trevor's smirk widened, showing a row of teeth that were a little too white. "The soup kitchen is a few blocks down. You can't miss it." Jalen felt a familiar, dull ache in his chest. It was the feeling of being prejudged, of being made small before he'd even spoken a word. He ignored the insult. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Your silence is more powerful than any argument." He met Trevor's gaze and spoke softly, his voice even. "I have a reservation. The name is Carter." Trevor made a show of looking at the reservation screen, tapping at it with a theatrical slowness. He hummed, pretending to search. "Carter. Carter. Nope. Don't see it. Are you sure you didn't mean Carlos at the taco truck outside?" Jalen didn't flinch. He knew the reservation was there. He had made it himself that afternoon. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a credit card. It wasn't just any card. It was a solid, heavy piece of black metal, an exclusive platinum card that whispered of limitless funds. He placed it gently on the counter. The contrast between the simple, everyday gesture and the immense power the card represented was stark. "Perhaps you could verify this," Jalen said, his voice still quiet, still polite. For a moment, Trevor just stared at the card. His brain seemed to short-circuit. The image of this teenager, in his street clothes, presenting a card reserved for the world's wealthiest elite was too much for his narrow worldview to process. And then, he did the only thing his mind could do to resolve the conflict. He laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, braying laugh that cut through the restaurant's quiet ambiance. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The diners at the nearby tables looked over, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "A platinum card," Trevor boomed, picking it up, as if it were a cheap toy. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, waving it in the air for everyone to see. "You expect me to believe you have a card like this? This is hilarious." "What? Did you find it on the street? Did you steal it from your daddy's wallet before he kicked you out?" Jalen's face grew warm. He could feel the blood rushing to his cheeks. Humiliation was a hot, sharp thing. He clenched his fists in his pockets, his knuckles pressing into the soft fleece. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell this arrogant fool exactly who he was, who his mother was. But he held his ground, remembering her words. Silence. Trevor wasn't finished. He was performing now, playing to the audience he imagined was on his side. "This is obviously fake. A cheap piece of plastic someone painted black," He looked around, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Security," he called out, his voice ringing with self-importance. "We have a kid here trying to pass a fraudulent credit card. He's also harassing the guests." A burly security guard in a dark suit started moving from the back of the restaurant. He had a weary, seen-it-all expression on his face. He approached the host stand, his eyes sizing up. "Jalen." He looked from the boy's hoodie to Trevor's smug face, and then to the black card. The guard hesitated. He'd seen rich kids dress down before. Something about the boy's stillness, his lack of panic, gave him pause. "He's harassing guests," Trevor repeated, louder this time, sensing the guard's hesitation. He needed this to be over. To have his judgment validated, he needs to be removed. Now. The guard took a step towards Jalen. "Son, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Jalen's heart sank. This was it. The moment of failure. He had tried to be quiet, to be patient, but it wasn't enough. He was about to be physically thrown out of a restaurant his own family now owned. The shame was suffocating. He opened his mouth to finally speak, to say something, anything, to stop the inevitable. But he didn't have to. From a corner of the room, near the coat check, a young woman watched the entire scene unfold. This was Emily Ruiz, the new hostess. It was her very first day. Her stomach was in knots. She saw the injustice clearly, the casual cruelty in Trevor's voice, the embarrassment on Jalen's face. She knew she should stay quiet. She needed this job. But every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Just as the security guard was about to place a hand on Jalen's arm, a frantic sound cut through the air, the squeak of expensive dress shoes moving too fast on polished marble. The restaurant manager, a man named Mr. Harrison, came sprinting from the back office, his face ashen. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed completely out of place in the calm restaurant. He skidded to a stop at the host's stand, nearly colliding with the security guard. "Stop," he gasped, his voice thin and reedy. "Don't touch him." The security guard froze, his hand hovering in the air. Trevor rolled his eyes, annoyed at the interruption. "Relax, Harrison. I've got this handled. Just getting rid of some street trash." Mr. Harrison's head snapped toward Trevor. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. He lowered his phone and spoke in a low, trembling whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "You have no idea what you've just done." He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose himself. He turned to the security guard. "Step away, now." He then looked at Jalen, his expression a desperate mix of apology and awe. "Mr. Carter, my deepest apologies. Your table is ready. Please, follow me." The shift was so sudden, so dramatic, it felt like a scene from a movie. Trevor's jaw dropped. "What? Harrison, are you insane? You're seriously going to treat a scammer like royalty? Look at him." The manager's glare was like ice. He stepped closer to Trevor, his voice a venomous hiss. "That scammer, as you call him, is the owner's son." He let the words hang in the air for a second before delivering the final blow. "And his mother, the new owner of the entire Hamilton's Grill Corporation, is watching her live feed from the security cameras in her office upstairs right now, and she is not happy." The color drained from Trevor's face. He went from a smug, arrogant waiter to a statue of pure panic in less than a second. He looked from the manager's terrified face to Jalen, who was now being personally escorted to the best table in the restaurant, the VIP booth in the secluded corner. The whispers started immediately among the diners. The kid in the hoodie was suddenly the most interesting person in the room. They stared, trying to reconcile the image of the boy who was almost thrown out with the reality of his newfound status. Trevor stood motionless, his world crumbling around him. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, not with admiration but with pity and disdain. He had built his self-worth on his ability to judge others, and he had just made the biggest misjudgment of his life. He could feel his career, his reputation, his entire sense of self, turning to dust. Humiliation washed over him, cold and complete. He turned and stumbled away from the host stand, heading toward the staff break room like a wounded animal, seeking a place to hide. As Jalen settled into the plush velvet of the VIP booth, Mr. Harrison was practically bowing. "Everything on the menu is complimentary, of course, Mr. Carter. Anything you desire. Our finest chef will prepare it personally. Can I get you a drink? A sparkling water? Perhaps the vintage grape juice? Jalen just nodded, still processing the sudden turn of events. A moment later, as the flustered manager scurried away, Emily Ruiz, the new hostess, quietly approached his table. She moved with a nervous energy, but her eyes were steady. Without a word, she slid a small folded napkin onto the table. Jalen looked at her, confused. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod and walked away before anyone could notice. Jalen picked up the napkin and unfolded it. Scrawled in neat, hurried handwriting were a few simple words. That wasn't right. I saw everything. I've got your back. Jalen held the note in his hand, the small piece of paper feeling like an anchor in the dizzying turn of events. In a room full of people who had judged him, one person had seen him. And that, he realized, might be the most important thing that had happened all night. Earlier that morning, the world had looked very different. The sun streamed into a sprawling Manhattan penthouse, illuminating particles of dust, dancing in the air. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was a breathtaking panorama of Central Park, a sea of green amidst a forest of steel and glass. In the center of the minimalist living room, Michelle Carter stood before her son, Jalen. She was in her 40s, a woman whose poise was as sharp and well-defined as her business suit. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, the look of someone who had fought for every inch of her success and had never forgotten where she came from. She held out the black platinum card. It looked small and unassuming in her hand. "You're 17 today, Jalen," she said, her voice a calm, steady melody. "It's time. You're old enough to see the world as it is, not as the world we live in up here," she gestured around the luxurious apartment, "but as the world most people experience every day. I want you to see how people treat you when they think you have nothing, when they think you are nothing." This was Michelle Carter, the self-made billionaire CEO. A woman who had started her career cleaning offices at night and now owned the parent company that managed those same cleaning contracts, along with a dozen other ventures. Her latest acquisition, finalized just last week, was the entire Hamilton's Grill restaurant chain. She hadn't bought it for the food, she had bought it because she understood that service, respect, and dignity were commodities far more valuable than any fancy dish. And she suspected they were in short supply. Jalen had been the one to suggest the experiment. He was tired of the bubble, tired of the bodyguards, the private cars, the way people's faces changed when they learned his last name. He wanted to walk into a room and be just Jalen, a kid in a hoodie. He wanted to feel the texture of the real world, even if it was rough. "I want to go in alone, Mom," he had told her. "No backup. I need to see how they really act when they think no one with power is watching." Michelle had agreed, though a part of her maternal instinct screamed against it. She knew the world could be cruel. She had felt its sharp edges herself, but she also knew that protecting him from that cruelty forever would be its own kind of prison. She needed him to be strong, not just physically, but in his spirit. "All right," she said, her gaze firm, "but you must remember the most important rule. Your silence is more powerful than any argument. Don't try to convince them of your worth. Let their actions show you who they are. Observe, understand. That is your weapon today." Jalen took the card, the cool, heavy metal feeling significant in his palm. He nodded, a silent promise passing between them. He changed out of his comfortable home clothes and put on the uniform for his mission, the worn jeans, the gray hoodie, the old sneakers. It was a costume of anonymity. As he walked toward the door, a young man stepping out into the city to face a test. Michelle picked up her phone. She dialed her chief legal advisor. "David," she said, her tone all business. "He's on his way. He'll be at the Fifth Avenue location in about 20 minutes. I want eyes on the internal security feed. Watch closely. Record everything. I have a feeling we're about to get a very clear picture of our new company's culture." Jalen had never wanted the spotlight. He wasn't like the other kids he sometimes met at his mother's charity galas, the ones who seemed born into their privilege, wearing it as easily as a designer watch. Jalen felt his family's wealth like an ill-fitting suit. It was something he had, not something he was. He saw the world with a quiet, observant clarity that often made him feel older than his 17 years. He saw how the world bent for people who looked a certain way and held a certain status, and how it hardened for those who did not. He saw it in the small things. The security guards who would shadow him closely when he went into a department store alone, their suspicion melting away the moment he used his mother's card. He saw it in the way some teachers would speak to his white classmates with an easy familiarity, while their tone with him was always a little more formal, a little more distant. These were not huge, dramatic acts of injustice. They were 1,000 tiny cuts, a constant, low-grade reminder that the world saw his skin and his hoodie before it saw him. His mother's story was his foundation. He knew she had once been a cleaning lady, scrubbing floors in buildings she could now buy with a single phone call. She had taught him that respect was not something you were given because of a title or a bank account. It was something you earned through your character, through how you treated the person mopping the floor, serving the coffee, or answering the phone. They both believed that true strength was invisible. It was the quiet integrity you held onto when no one was looking. This experiment, this walk into Hamilton's grill, was deeply personal for Jalen. It wasn't about catching someone in a gotcha moment. It was a quest for truth. He wanted to test the world's assumptions without the safety net of his family's name. He wanted to know for himself if the kindness and respect he usually received were real, or if they were just transactions based on his perceived power. Sitting now in the VIP booth, the napkin from the hostess still in his hand, he felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. He had his answer. The world, in the form of Trevor the waiter, had shown its ugly side without hesitation. But then there was Emily, a flicker of hope in the darkness. A few minutes later, Emily stopped by his table again, this time with a pitcher of ice water. She moved with a practiced efficiency, but her eyes met his for a brief moment. "Thank you," Jalen said softly, gesturing with the folded napkin. "For the note." Emily glanced around, making sure the manager wasn't watching. "It was nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What he did was wrong. It's not complicated. Most people just look the other way," Jalen said, a hint of his own weariness showing through. A shadow passed over Emily's face, a flicker of a painful memory. "I've been on the other side of that look," she replied, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "The one that says you don't belong. I don't forget what that feels like." In that moment, a small, unspoken alliance was formed. It was a bond between two people from vastly different worlds, connected by a shared understanding of dignity. Jalen realized that his experiment wasn't just about exposing the bad, it was also about finding the good, even in the most unexpected places. He looked at Emily, the young hostess on her first day, who had risked her job for a stranger, and he felt a sense of gratitude that was far more valuable than any complimentary meal. Emily Ruiz was 22 years old, and she was running on fumes. The Hamilton's grill job was her second job. Her first was an early morning shift at a coffee shop that started at 5 a.m. The money from both, she hoped, would be just enough to cover her rent, her tuition for night classes, and help her mother with her two younger siblings back home. Debt was a constant, heavy weight on her shoulders, a ghost that followed her through her long days. This hostess position, with its promise of better tips and a more professional environment, felt like a lifeline. Losing it was not an option. So when she first saw Trevor confront the young man in the hoodie, her first instinct was to look away. "Mind your own business." A voice in her head screamed, "Don't make waves. You are on day one. You are replaceable." She tried to focus on the seating chart, on the smooth, polished surface of the host stand, but she couldn't ignore it. She saw the way Trevor's lip curled in a sneer. She heard the smug cruelty in his voice as he mocked Jalen, his words echoing in the quiet restaurant. She saw the flush of shame on Jalen's face, and her stomach twisted in a knot of empathy. No one was stopping it. The other staff members averted their eyes. The diners watched with a detached curiosity, as if it were a play being performed for their amusement. Her own memories flooded back. A high-end boutique where a saleswoman had followed her from aisle to aisle, her suspicion, a palpable force. A guidance counselor in high school who had suggested she aim for a trade school instead of a university, despite her good grades. She knew that look, she knew that tone. It was the quiet, soul-crushing message that you were less than. Still, she did nothing. Fear was a powerful paralytic. She stood frozen in her corner as Trevor called for security, as Jalen stood on the precipice of being thrown out. It was only the manager's frantic arrival that broke the spell. Seeing the power dynamic shift so violently was jarring, but the relief she felt was quickly replaced by a simmering anger. Anger at Trevor, and anger at herself for her own silence. She debated letting it go. The situation was resolved. The kid was fine. He was more than fine. He was the owner's son. But the injustice of it gnawed at her. The fact that Trevor would have gotten away with it, that he would have been praised for it if Jalen had been just some ordinary kid, felt deeply wrong. The tipping point came about an hour later, during a brief lull in service. She walked past the staff break room and heard Trevor's voice. Still loud, still arrogant. He wasn't remorseful. He was bragging. "Can you believe, Harrison?" he said to another waiter. Totally lost his mind. "The kid tried to flex a fake platinum card, and I put him in his place. I embarrassed him so bad, he looked like he was about to cry. And now I'm the bad guy? It's ridiculous." That was it. The casual cruelty, the complete lack of empathy, the pride he took in humiliating someone. It was a fire alarm in her conscience. The fear for her job was still there, but her sense of right and wrong was screaming louder. She thought of her younger brother and sister. What kind of example would she be if she let this stand? With a newfound resolve, Emily walked calmly back to the host stand. She glanced at the business card holder, which contained cards for the restaurant's general manager. On the back of one, an administrative assistant had scribbled the general email for the corporate headquarters, her heart pounding in her chest. She discreetly slipped one of the cards into her pocket. She then walked to the quiet hallway leading to the restrooms, pulled out her phone, and opened the voice memo app. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear and steady. "My name is Emily Ruiz. I am a new hostess at the Hamilton's Grill on 5th Avenue. Today is my first day. At approximately 7:15 p.m., I witnessed a waiter named Trevor Dalton verbally harass and humiliate a young customer named Jalen Carter. He falsely accused the customer of using a fraudulent credit card and called security to have him removed, despite the customer being polite and calm. The waiter's behavior was unprofessional, discriminatory, and deeply inappropriate. She detailed everything she saw, every word she heard. She saved the memo. Then she opened her email, attached the audio file, and sent it to the general HR inbox at corporate headquarters. She sent a second, shorter email to the owner's assistant, using the address from the card, briefly explaining that a serious incident had occurred and that she had a formal statement ready. As she pressed send, a wave of terror and relief washed over her. She had either just saved her integrity or destroyed her career. Trevor Dalton felt bulletproof. The manager's frantic apologies and the revelation about Jalen being the owner's son were, in his mind, just a temporary setback. A misunderstanding. He was convinced Mr. Harrison was bluffing, or at least exaggerating, to scare him. The idea that a billionaire CEO would care about a minor interaction between a waiter and her scruffy-looking son seemed absurd. Rich people, in his experience, didn't concern themselves with such petty details. They had people to handle things. So, instead of being contrite, he was indignant. He spent the rest of his shift stomping around the restaurant, his face a mask of aggrieved righteousness. He complained to any coworker who would listen, his voice a loud, theatrical whisper. "This is what happens when new money takes over," he sneered to a busboy. "No class. They let their kids run around like vagrants, and then expect us to kiss their feet. It's pathetic." To another waitress, he grumbled. "So now we're supposed to pretend some random kid in a hoodie owns the place. I'm supposed to be scared of him. Please." But arrogance was a shield, protecting his fragile ego from the truth. He had made a colossal error in judgment. To admit that would be to admit that his entire system for evaluating people was flawed. It was easier to believe that the world had gone mad, not that he had been wrong. The peak of his delusion came when he saw Jalen get up from his table and walk toward the men's restroom. As Jalen passed the service station where Trevor was polishing glasses, Trevor couldn't resist another jab. He leaned over to a fellow waiter and said, just loud enough for Jalen to hear, "Hope he doesn't steal the soap." The other waiter just stared at him, wide-eyed, and quickly walked away. Trevor chuckled to himself, feeling like he had scored a small victory, reasserting his perceived dominance. That night, fueled by 2 strong drinks at a nearby bar, Trevor's arrogance reached its zenith. He felt the need to tell his side of the story, to control the narrative. He pulled out his phone, opened TikTok, and started recording. The dim light of the bar cast shadows on his face, making his expression look even more smug. "You guys will not believe the night I had," he began, slurring his words slightly. So I'm at work at a very high-end establishment, and this kid walks in, looking like he just crawled out of a dumpster. Hoodie, dirty sneakers, the whole deal. And he tries to act like he belongs there. He laughed into the camera. Then he pulls out this laughably fake black credit card. So I call him out on it. Because we have standards, you know? He leaned closer to the phone, his eyes gleaming. And get this, suddenly my manager is telling me he's the owner's son. Yeah. Right, just another example of rich black kids acting like they own the world, thinking they can go anywhere they want, trying to flex in white spaces where they don't belong. He posted the video, tagging it with hashtags like Karen, entitled, and waiter life. He expected a wave of sympathy, of people validating his frustration. For the first few minutes, he got it. A few comments cheered him on. Good for you, one said. Put him in his place, said another. But then, the tide turned. The algorithm, in its mysterious way, pushed the video to a wider audience. The comments started to change. Wait, you work at Hamilton's Grill, the chain that was just bought by Michelle Carter? Another user wrote. Someone else chimed in. Michelle Carter, the black billionaire CEO. You just mocked her son. On video? A third comment was more direct. Dude, you are so fine. Trevor's drunken confidence began to evaporate. He scrolled through the flood of new comments, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. The video's view count was exploding. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. He had wanted to go viral, but not like this. Not like this, at all. He watched in horror as his face, his words, his casual bigotry were shared and dissected by thousands of strangers. The screen of his phone, which he had used as a weapon, now felt like the glowing fuse of a bomb he had just lit under his own life. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his arrogant delusion. He had not just made a mistake at work, he had made a public spectacle of his own downfall. Miles away in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the glittering lights of the city, the mood was the opposite of chaotic. It was cold, precise, and utterly controlled. Michelle Carter sat at the head of a long, polished table, flanked by her chief legal advisor and two other members of her executive team. The experiment was over. The data had been collected. On a large screen at the end of the room, 4 different security camera angles from Hamilton's Grill were displayed. They had watched the entire incident unfold in real time. They had seen Trevor's sneer, heard his mocking laughter through the audio feed. They had seen Jalen's quiet humiliation and Emily's quiet courage. Michelle's face was unreadable, a mask of calm professionalism. But inside, a quiet, controlled anger burned. It was not the hot, explosive anger of an outburst, but the cold, focused anger of a surgeon preparing to make a precise incision. She had seen this look, this dismissal, 1,000 times in her own life. To see it directed at her son, a good, kind boy who she had raised to be better than the world that would judge him, was intolerable. Her legal advisor, David, cleared his throat. The hostess, Emily Ruiz, sent a voice memo to HR and a direct email to your assistant. She corroborated everything we saw. She's taking a significant risk. Courage should be rewarded, not punished. Michelle said simply. She then looked at another screen, this one showing Trevor's now viral TikTok video. And arrogance, she added, her voice dropping a half octave, needs to be corrected, publicly. She picked up her phone, her movements, economical and deliberate. She dialed a number from memory, the direct line to the chairman of the parent company's board of directors, the man she had just replaced. He picked up on the first ring. John, it's Michelle Carter, she said, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries. I trust you're aware of the incident at our 5th Avenue location this evening. There was a nervous stammer on the other end of the line. Yes, Michelle, we're just getting a handle on it. She cut him off. There is nothing to get a handle on. There is only a response. Effective immediately. I want a mandatory, all-staff meeting scheduled at the Hamilton's Grill 5th Avenue location. Tomorrow, at noon sharp. Full staff present. From the dishwashers to the manager. The relevant board members from the hospitality division are also required to be there. There will be no exceptions. Is that clear? The silence on the other end was answer enough. Crystal clear, Michelle, he finally managed to say. Good, she said, and hung up without saying goodbye. The call had lasted less than a minute. She had dismantled a crisis and set a reckoning in motion with fewer than 100 words. She then opened her text messages and found her conversation with Jalen. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. The test is over. You did well. Now it's time to show them who they disrespected. I'll see you at the restaurant tomorrow morning. Jalen read the text in the quiet of his room back at the penthouse. He felt a sense of dread, but also of resolution. The quiet part was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The next morning, an email went out to every employee of Hamilton's Grill on Fifth Avenue. The subject line was stark. Mandatory staff meeting at 12 p.m. No reason was given, but the tone was absolute. All shifts were covered. Attendance was not optional. Formal attire was required. Trevor got the email while nursing a splitting headache and a stomach full of regret. He had finally deleted the TikTok, but it was too late. It had been screen recorded and shared thousands of times. He was an internet villain. Still, a part of him clung to a desperate hope. Maybe the meeting was just a standard corporate scolding. Maybe if he showed up looking professional and offered a sincere apology, he could salvage his job. He put on his best suit, his hands trembling as he knotted his tie. He felt less like he was getting ready for work, and more like he was dressing for his own funeral. Emily Ruiz arrived early, her nerves a tangled mess. She had barely slept, replaying her decision to send the emails over and over in her mind. She wore a simple black blazer and slacks, feeling a mix of terror and resolve. She had told the truth. Whatever happened next, she would face it with her head held high. At 11:30, Jalen Carter entered the restaurant, not through the front door, but through the quiet rear service entrance. The staff bustling in the kitchen barely noticed him. He was no longer the anonymous kid in a hoodie. Today, he wore a perfectly fitted dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a look of quiet determination. He walked with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from purpose. He went straight to the private owner's office on the second floor, a room he had never been in before. His mother, Michelle, was already there, standing by the window, looking down at the street below. She turned as he entered, and a small, proud smile touched her lips. She simply nodded. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. At noon sharp, the main dining room was silent. The tables had been pushed to the sides, and the entire staff was gathered in the center, standing in nervous rows. The dishwashers stood next to the line cooks, the bussers next to the waiters, all of them in their formal best. Mr. Harrison, the manager, stood at the front, his face pale and sweaty. A handful of men and women in expensive corporate suits stood off to one side. These were the board members, their faces grim. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty. Trevor stood in the middle of the pack, trying to look small, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He could feel the whispers and stares of his colleagues. He was a pariah. Then the door to the owner's office opened, and Michelle Carter walked in. A collective, quiet gasp went through the room. She was a legend in the business world, a figure many of them had only read about in magazines. She was poised, powerful, and radiated an authority that was absolute. Trevor, in a final, foolish flicker of his former self, didn't recognize her at first. He leaned over to the waiter next to him. "Who's that? She looks like Beyoncé or something," he whispered. The other waiter shushed him violently, his eyes wide with fear. Michelle Carter walked to the front of the room, her gaze sweeping over the assembled staff. She stopped in the center, and the silence deepened. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. "Good afternoon," she began. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Michelle Carter, and as of last week, I am the new owner of this company." She paused, letting that sink in. "We are here today to discuss an incident that occurred in this restaurant last night. We are here to discuss the standard of service at Hamilton's Grill. And we are here," she said, her eyes finally landing on Trevor, a laser beam of cold focus, "to discuss the treatment of my son." She gestured toward the office door, and Jalen stepped out, coming to stand beside her. The truth landed like a bomb. The room erupted in gasps. A waitress's jaw literally dropped. The busboy who Trevor had complained to took an involuntary step back. Trevor froze completely, his entire body turning to ice. The blood rushed from his head, and the room began to tilt. The kid, the scammer, the boy he had humiliated, mocked, and tried to have thrown into the street, was standing at the front of the room next to the most powerful woman in their industry, and she had just called him her son. Emily, standing in the back, felt a wave of profound relief wash over her. It was real. The truth was out. Her gamble had paid off. Michelle did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were sharp enough to cut through steel. Last night, my son, Jalen, came to this restaurant for a meal. He was met with mockery, disrespect, and false accusations. He was publicly humiliated by an employee who judged him not by his character, but by his clothes. She nodded to a technician, and a large screen behind her flickered to life. It was the security footage from the host stand. The entire room watched in horrified silence as the scene played out. They saw Jalen's polite request. They saw Trevor's sneer. They heard his mocking words amplified now for everyone to hear. "You sure you're in the right place, kid? Did you find it on the street?" They watched as Trevor called for security, as he loudly accused Jalen of harassing guests. The raw footage was damning, undeniable. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. It was thick with shame and disbelief. Trevor stood in the center of it, exposed and utterly broken. He looked at Michelle, his eyes pleading, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't know," he finally stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. It was the weakest of all excuses, the last refuge of a man with no defense. Michelle's eyes were like chips of ice. She took a step forward. "No, Trevor," she said, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "You didn't know he was my son. You didn't know I was watching. But that is not the point. The point is you didn't care to know who he was as a person. You saw a young black man in a hoodie, and you decided he was worthless. You decided he didn't belong. You didn't see a customer. You saw a stereotype." She turned her gaze from Trevor and addressed the corporate board members, who were now looking at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. "I bought this restaurant chain because I believe that hospitality is built on a foundation of dignity. Dignity for every single person who walks through that door, regardless of what they wear, what they look like, or how much money you think they have. Last night, dignity was absent from this room, and that is a failure at every level of this company." Trevor's face was chalk white. He was no longer just an employee in trouble. He was a symbol. He was the living embodiment of the very disease Michelle Carter was here to eradicate. He felt the weight of every eye in the room on him, and he knew with a soul-crushing certainty that there was no coming back from this. Michelle Carter turned her full attention back to Trevor. The room held its breath. Her expression was not angry. It was something far more terrifying. It was final. "Trevor Dalton," she said, her voice leaving no room for appeal. "Your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately." She said the words with the simple declarative force of a judge passing sentence. "You're done." As if on cue, the head of human resources, a woman in a severe gray suit, stepped forward from the line of board members. She carried a thick file folder. She walked directly to Trevor and held it out to him. "These are your termination papers," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Your employee accounts and building access have already been revoked." Trevor just stared at the folder, unable to move, unable to speak. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and denial. This couldn't be happening. A whole career, a whole life, erased in a single moment. He looked around wildly, searching for a friendly face, an ally, anyone who would speak up for him. But there was nothing. The other staff members, the people he had worked with and joked with just yesterday, now looked at him with a mixture of fear and contempt. They avoided his gaze, their silence a wall he could not penetrate. They were distancing themselves from his toxicity, saving themselves. He tried to argue, to plead. "Please," he croaked, looking at Michelle. "It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I can change. I can apologize. Just give me another chance." But his pleas were swallowed by the heavy silence. He had shown no mercy, and he would receive none. Then Jalen, who had been standing silently beside his mother, took a half step forward. He spoke for the first time, his voice not loud, but clear and strong, cutting through the tension. He looked directly at the man who had tried to break him. "It wasn't just a mistake," Jalen said. "It was a choice. You chose to be cruel. You chose to look down on someone because you thought you could." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Next time you look down on someone, look again. You never know who you're talking to." It was not a threat. It was a piece of advice, delivered with a calm dignity that was 1,000 times more powerful than any insult Trevor had ever hurled. It was the final, devastating blow. The humiliation was complete. The HR director nudged the folder into Trevor's numb hands. "You need to leave the premises now," she said firmly. Defeated, speechless, and utterly alone, Trevor turned. He walked the longest walk of his life, through the silent gauntlet of his former colleagues. He pushed open the heavy glass door of the restaurant and stumbled out onto the sidewalk, into the bright, unforgiving light of day. And that's when he saw them. A small crowd had gathered. News vans from 2 local stations were parked at the curb, their cameras already rolling. Someone had leaked his TikTok video to the press, along with the news of the mandatory meeting. His private humiliation was now a public spectacle. As the cameras zoomed in on his face, Trevor knew he wasn't just fired. He was infamous. Back inside the restaurant, the heavy tension began to break. Michelle Carter's demeanor softened, the icy fire in her eyes replaced by a look of warmth and resolve. She turned to the assembled staff, her gaze finding Emily Ruiz in the back of the room. "Emily," she called out, "could you please step forward?" Emily's heart leaped into her throat. She walked forward, her legs feeling unsteady, until she stood before the CEO. Michelle smiled, a genuine, appreciative smile. "Last night," she said, her voice now warm and loud enough for everyone to hear. "In a moment when it would have been easy to stay silent, when fear for your own job would have been understandable, you chose to do the right thing. You showed integrity, you showed courage, and you showed a deep understanding of what true service is all about." She turned to the head of HR. "This young woman has been a hostess for 1 day. That is a waste of her talent." She looked back at Emily. "Emily Ruiz, I am offering you a new position. A full-time role on the corporate service and training team. You'll help us develop a new curriculum for all our restaurants, one based on the principles of dignity and respect that you demonstrated last night. It comes with a full salary, benefits, and a clear path for upward mobility within this company. We need more people like you in leadership." Emily was stunned into silence. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of shock, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. A full-time corporate job, a salary, benefits. It was life-changing. It was a lifeline she had never dreamed of. She finally found her voice, a small, choked whisper. "Thank you." She looked over at Jalen, who gave her a wide, sincere smile. Impulsively, she stepped forward and gave him a quick, heartfelt hug. "Thank you," she whispered to him. Spontaneously, one of the cooks in the back started to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't just for Emily. It was an applause of relief, of a toxic presence being removed, and of hope for a new direction. Michelle let the applause die down before she addressed the entire team one last time. Her voice was firm, but now it held the tone of a leader, not a prosecutor. "Let me be clear," she said, her eyes sweeping across every face. "This isn't just about one mistake or one bad employee. This is about who we choose to be as a company. This is about the culture we build together. From this day forward, our most important value is the dignity of every single person who walks through our doors, guest and employee alike. It's about who we are when we think no one important is watching. Because as you learned today, someone is always watching. Most importantly, you are watching yourselves." A new feeling settled over the room, a sense of shared purpose, of a new beginning. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet respect for the woman who had not just cleaned house, but had laid down a new foundation. Jalen walked out of the restaurant with his mother, back into the noise and energy of New York City. The sun was bright, and the air felt fresh. He looked back at the elegant facade of Hamilton's Grill, the building that was now a monument to the most difficult and important lesson of his young life. It was the place where he had been disrespected and demeaned, but it was also the place where he had found his voice, not by shouting, but by standing firm in his own quiet worth. He looked at his mother, the architect of this entire, painful, necessary ordeal. "You were right," he said, the words carrying the weight of his experience. "Silence is powerful, and so is the truth." Michelle put a proud arm around his shoulder, pulling him close as they walked down the busy sidewalk. "No one can ever take your worth from you, Jalen," she said, her voice soft but sure. "But they will try. They will always try to put you in a box, to judge you on the surface. Now, at least in this small corner of the world, they know better. They know to look again. Respect isn't earned through appearances, through expensive clothes or fancy titles. It is forged in how we treat the people we think have no power, the ones we believe can't fight back. Because sometimes, the quiet kid in the hoodie is the one who owns the building you're standing in. And true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about having the character to be kind, even when you don't have to be. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.